She used my name to sign a lease and my husband helped her hide it for 4 months. I found out on a Tuesday, which I remember because I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift and there was a FedEx envelope wedged between our front door and the frame. My name was on it. My full legal name, Adrian Wolf, printed clean and official across the front. I almost threw it on the counter without opening it. I was tired in that specific way where you stop being a person and become just a body moving through rooms. But something made me stop. Inside was a notice from a commercial property management company in Tempe, Arizona. It said I was 30 days past due on a lease agreement for a retail space on Mill Avenue. It said my signature was on file. It said if I didn't respond within 10 business days, they would begin collections proceedings. I had never been to Tempe. I had never signed anything for any retail space. I had never heard of this property management company in my life. I sit in my kitchen in my work clothes and read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down on the counter very carefully, like it was something that might break, and I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the bed. My mother-in-law had always wanted to open a gift shop. She'd been talking about it for years, the kind of small boutique that sold handmade candles and local art and those little signs that say things like, "Home is where the heart is." My husband thought it was sweet. He'd say, "She just needs someone to believe in her." I believed in her fine. I just didn't want to be her collateral. My name is Adrian. I'm 31 years old. I work as a respiratory therapist at a hospital in Scottsdale. My mother-in-law's name is Roberta, and she had been living with us for 8 months at that point, ever since her second divorce went through and she needed, as my husband put it, a soft landing. She had her own bedroom. She ate our food. She did not pay rent. I did not say anything about any of that because I loved my husband and I wanted to be the kind of person who didn't make things harder than they needed to be. But this was my name on a commercial lease I never signed. I didn't say anything at dinner that night. I watched her cut her chicken. I watched my husband refill her water glass. I listened to her talk about how the gift shop was almost ready to launch, how she'd found the perfect location, how everything was falling into place. I smiled where smiling was called for. I said almost nothing. My husband glanced at me once, and I looked back at him in a way that I think told him nothing, because he looked away easily. Later, when we were in bed and the lights were off, he said, "You were quiet tonight." I said I was tired from work. He said okay, and turned over. I lay there for a long time after his breathing went even, and I thought about the fact that my name was on a piece of paper I'd never touched, committing me to 12 months of rent on a commercial space I'd never seen, and that the woman who had done this was sleeping 20 feet down the hallway in a room I had painted myself. Calm doesn't mean you're not angry. Calm just means you're thinking instead of reacting. The next morning, I called in a personal day. My husband left for work at 7:15. I waited until I heard his car back out of the driveway, and then I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and the FedEx envelope and a cup of coffee, and I started making calls. The property management company was easy enough to reach. I spoke to a woman named Amy, who was professionally sympathetic in the way people are when they're reading from a script. She confirmed that a lease had been signed in my name for a retail space on Mill Avenue. She said the lease was for 12 months. She said the monthly rent was $1,800. She said the first 2 payments had been made from a checking account that was not mine, but that the lease itself was in my name with my social security number and my driver's license number on file. I asked her to email me a copy of the lease. She said she wasn't sure she could do that without identity verification. I told her she was about to get a lot more than identity verification. I gave her my full name, my social, my license number, the address on the license. I told her my signature had been forged and that I had not authorized anyone to use my information to sign any contract, and that I would be filing a police report today, and that I would follow up with her directly once I had the case number, and that it would be helpful for both of us if she had that documentation in her files. There was a pause. She emailed me the lease 11 minutes later. I looked at my signature on that document for a long time. It was good. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough that I understood how it had gotten through. Roberta had seen my signature plenty of times. Birthday cards, holiday cards. I had signed things in front of her. She'd had 8 months in my house with access to mail, to paperwork, to everything. And my husband had known. I was sure of it the moment I read the lease date, March 14th. I remembered that date specifically because it was the day I'd worked a double shift and come home at 2 in the morning, and my husband had been unusually attentive, making me tea, asking about my day longer than normal. I had thought at the time that it was sweet. Now I understood it as distraction. I did not call him. I did not text him. I went to the Scottsdale Police Department and I filed a report for identity theft and fraud. The officer I spoke to was younger than me and very thorough. He asked good questions. He documented everything. He gave me a case number and told me to preserve all communication and documentation, which I already planned to do. From the police station, I drove to a strip mall on Shea Boulevard, where there is a small law office I had looked up on my phone. I had chosen it because it had good reviews and the consultation fee was listed as $75, and I needed someone to tell me exactly what I was dealing with. The attorney I met with was a woman in her 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and who looked at the lease and the notice letter and listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you want to minimize damage or do you want it documented?" I said I wanted both. She explained my options. Identity theft was a serious charge in Arizona. Forgery of a financial document was its own separate charge. Civil liability for the rent owed and any collections damages was also possible. The person who had used my information and anyone who had materially assisted or concealed the act could face significant consequences. I asked her what materially assisted meant. She looked at me over her glasses. "It means if your husband knew and didn't tell you, he's not just a bystander." I paid my $75 and I scheduled a follow-up appointment. I drove home and I made lunch, and I folded a load of laundry, and I did not think about anything except the sequence of steps I needed to take and the order I needed to take them in. Revenge doesn't need noise. It needs patience and accurate paperwork. When my husband came home that evening, Roberto was in the living room watching television. He kissed me on the cheek in the kitchen. I handed him a glass of water. I asked about his day. He talked. I listened. Dinner was normal. After dinner, he went upstairs. Roberta stayed for her shows. I took the dogs for a walk around the block. When I came back, I went upstairs too, and I closed the bedroom door, and I pulled up the lease on my laptop and I sent it to our joint email account with the subject line, "I need to talk to you about this. Tonight." He didn't open it for 40 minutes. When he did, I was sitting in the chair by the window reading a book I wasn't really reading. I watched his face from across the room. He read it again. And then he did a thing I will never forget. He closed the laptop slowly, like closing it carefully would slow down what was happening. He said, "Where did you get this?" I said, "It came in the mail, my name is on it." He said, "It's not. She was going to tell you." And that was when I knew for certain, not suspected, knew. I said, "When?" He said she was waiting until the business got off the ground, until she could show me it was working, until she could pay me back. I said, "Pay me back for what? I didn't agree to anything." He said he knew it wasn't ideal. He said she didn't have the credit to get the lease on her own. He said it would only be for a year. He said she was going to pay every month. I said, "She's already a month behind." He went quiet. I said, "I filed a police report this morning." The silence that followed was a different kind than before. Not the silence of someone choosing what to say, the silence of someone realizing the conversation they thought they were having is not the conversation that's happening. He said, "You filed a police report." I said, "Yes." He said, "Against my mother." I said, "Against whoever used my name without my consent to sign a legal document. If that's your mother, that's a question for her." He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked like something structural had gone out of him. He said I was overreacting. He said it could have been handled inside the family. He said his mother would be humiliated, that this could follow her, that he never asked me for much, and he was asking me now to let it go. I let him finish. Then I said, "I warned you about this." He looked at me. "What?" I said, "Not specifically, but when she moved in, I told you I needed us to have clear limits. I told you I needed to know when things involved me. You said yes, that was the boundary. She crossed it and you helped her hide it, which means you crossed it too." He said that wasn't fair. I said a lot of things aren't fair. That night he slept in the guest room. I didn't ask him to, he just went. The next morning, Roberta made coffee like nothing had happened. She asked how I slept. I told her I had some questions for her. I sat down at the kitchen table and I put the lease in front of her. She looked at it for a long time, and then she did what I had expected, which was to make herself very small and very sorry. She said she had only done it because she had no options. She said she'd never meant to put me in a difficult position. She said she'd been paying on time until this month, that it was just one bad month. She said she thought of me like a daughter, which was the part that made something go flat inside me, because people who actually think of you like a daughter don't sign your name to things without asking. I let her talk. When she stopped, I said, "The lease needs to come out of my name. I've spoken to an attorney and to the police. You'll be receiving paperwork." She said, "Paperwork?" I said, "A formal notice regarding the fraudulent use of my identity and a request for reimbursement of any financial exposure that results, including the overdue rent." She said I was being dramatic. I said, "I'm being accurate, there's a difference." She pushed back from the table and went to call my husband, which I had also expected. I could hear her voice through the hallway. Not the words, just the tone. Urgent, injured, already framing herself as the one this was happening to. My husband came home early from work that afternoon. He wanted to talk. We talked. He said his mother was scared. I said she should have thought about that before. He said she didn't understand what she was doing. I said she understood enough to wait until I was gone to sign it. He said she was family. I said family doesn't mean unlimited access to my legal identity. He said, "What do you want from her?" I said, "Her name on the lease and mine off of it, reimbursement for the overdue month, and a signed acknowledgement of what happened, because if this goes further, I need documentation." He said, "You want a confession?" I said, "I want a paper trail. I'm not doing this for drama. I'm doing this because my name is on a debt I didn't create, and I need that corrected before it affects my credit." He said he thought I was being vindictive. I looked at him for a long moment. He was my husband. I had moved furniture with him and cleaned up after his sick dogs and held his hand at his father's funeral and split $12 sandwiches in the car in the parking lot of a hardware store on a Saturday afternoon, and this is who he was when it got hard. I said, "I think you already knew what vindictive looks like and chose not to use the word until it was convenient." He didn't answer. The next 2 weeks, with a kind of quiet that lives in the walls. Roberta avoided the kitchen when I was in it. My husband slept in our room, but we barely touched. He went to see her a lot in the evenings. Long visits. I did not ask what they talked about. I went back to work. I did my job. I came home. I ran the numbers. I stayed in close contact with my attorney, who was efficient and exact and whose emails I read like instruction manuals. The attorney sent a formal demand letter to Roberta outlining the fraudulent use of my identifying information and requesting that she contact the property management company to attempt a lease reassignment and that she remit the overdue rent in full plus a written acknowledgement. The letter was polite and unambiguous and had a response deadline of 14 business days. On day 11, my husband came home with a look I'd never seen on him before. Not anger, not defensiveness, something more like exhaustion, the kind that comes when a version of yourself you were holding on to finally lets go. He sat at the kitchen table and said, "She can't get the lease in her name. Her credit is too bad. The landlord won't approve her." I said, "I know." He said, "So what happens?" I said, "She can find a guarantor who actually consents to being one. She can negotiate a sublease. She can close the shop and break the lease and pay the penalty. Those are her options." He said, "You knew this would happen." I said, "I knew that my name needed to come off that document regardless of what happened to the shop. Yes." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that I have thought about every day since. He said, "She told me you'd be fine with it. She said you were generous, that you wouldn't mind." I said, "Did you believe her, or did you want to believe her?" He didn't answer, but the way he didn't answer was its own answer. Here's the part that surprised everyone, including me. Roberta paid. Not right away. Not without a second letter from my attorney and a follow-up email from me to the property management company flagging the situation formally. But on the last day before the response deadline expired, she sent a cashier's check for the overdue rent and signed the acknowledgement document my attorney had drafted. She did not call me. She did not apologize in person. She sent everything through my husband like I was a business contact she'd never met. I processed it the same way. My attorney filed the acknowledgement, confirmed with the property management company that they were beginning the process of removing my name from the lease, pending lease reassignment, and sent me a final summary email, clean, complete, documented. The gift shop closed 6 weeks later. I don't know all the details. I didn't ask. My husband and I had one last real conversation about it in the kitchen on a Sunday morning when the house was quiet and we were both holding coffee and neither of us was pretending anymore. He said he was sorry. I believed he meant it. I also believed sorry is a word that tells you where someone stands, not what they'll do differently. I told him I needed something from him that wasn't an apology. I needed to know that if it ever came down to a choice between protecting his mother's comfort and protecting my actual legal standing, that I came first, not because of a hierarchy, because of a contract we made to each other before any of this. He said he understood that now. I said I hope so. We are still married. That might surprise some people. It surprised me a little, but the version of us that exists now has edges. It didn't have before. And I think that might actually be more honest than what we had. Roberta doesn't live with us anymore. She moved in with her sister in Flagstaff. My husband sees her sometimes on weekends. He doesn't tell me much about those visits, and I don't ask. There are things a marriage can hold and things it can't, and we are both still learning exactly where those lines are. What I know is this: my credit is clean. My name is not on anything I didn't authorize. My attorney's number is still in my phone. And I trust my husband more now, not because I think he's perfect, but because I've seen what he looks like when he's cornered and ashamed, and he chose accountability over loyalty to the version of events that was easier for him. That was not a small thing. There is a specific kind of strength in not needing the other person to suffer in order for you to feel like justice happened. I didn't need Roberta to be publicly shamed. I didn't need my husband to grovel. I needed my name removed from a contract, my money returned, and a clear understanding of what I would and would not accept going forward. I got all three. People are slowly being passive. They assume that because you didn't scream, you weren't serious. They assume that because you stayed, you were okay with what happened. None of that is true. Quiet is just what you sound like when you've already decided. She thought I was too tired to look at my own mail. She thought I was too nice to make it hard. She thought my husband would always be the wall between me and any consequence she faced. She miscalculated all three. The thing I keep coming back to is the FedEx envelope. How close I came to just throwing it on the counter. How many times before that I had let things slide past me because I was tired, because I was trying to be easy, because I told myself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping myself whole. It wasn't. Peace that cost you your name on a document you never signed isn't peace. It's just postponed damage. What Roberta did had a logic to it. She watched me for 8 months. She saw that I worked long shifts and came home depleted. She saw that I deferred, smoothed things over, filled silences with grace I hadn't been asked to give. She made a calculation about who I was, and for a long time she was right. That's the part I have to sit with honestly. She didn't come out of nowhere. She came out of every time I chose, quiet over clarity. But here's what she miscalculated. The same discipline that made me hold my tongue at dinner is the same discipline that let me walk into a police station the next morning without shaking. Patience isn't weakness. It's just strength that hasn't decided where to go yet. I think about my husband too, and I try to be fair about it. He is not a villain. He is a man who loved his mother more than he was honest with his wife, and when those two things collided, he chose the path that required less courage. That's a human failure, not a monstrous one. But human failures still have consequences, and I needed him to understand that protecting someone from accountability is not the same as loving them. You can love someone and still let them face what they caused. Those things are not opposites. What carried me through all of it, the attorney's office, the demand letters, the weeks of kitchen silence, wasn't anger. Anger burns fast and leaves you empty. What carried me was something slower and more deliberate. It was knowing exactly what I needed, being honest enough with myself to name it, and being willing to take every step required to get there even when those steps were uncomfortable, and even when the person sitting across from me at the kitchen table was someone I had promised to build a life with. I didn't need Roberta to apologize. I needed my name off that lease. I didn't need my husband to beg. I needed to know he understood what he had participated in. There's a difference between justice and punishment, and I think most people who feel wronged blur that line because the pain makes them want the other person to hurt as much as they do. I understand that impulse. I just didn't follow it. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that the clearest thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be a resource, not a person someone draws from, not a name someone borrows, not a silence someone fills in with their own assumptions. The moment I stopped being useful to Roberta's plan, she paid every dollar and disappeared. That told me everything I needed to know about what I had actually been to her. You find out who people are when the convenience runs out.